The photograph sits in a yellowed envelope marked Evidence. Case 1921-47 in the basement archives of the Chicago Police Department. At first glance, it appears unremarkably typical group portrait from the early 1920s, showing 5 women at what appears to be a social gathering. But look closer, and you'll notice something that has haunted investigators for over a century. In the center of the photograph, a young woman named Helena Rosenberg is pointing directly at the camera with an expression of pure terror. Her mouth open as if screaming a warning that the camera captured but could not convey. What makes this image truly chilling is that Helena was found murdered exactly 3 days after this photograph was taken. And the circumstances surrounding her death suggest she knew her killer was watching, waiting, and planning her demise. Even as she posed for what would become her final portrait, Helena Rosenberg was 24 years old when she died. A seamstress working in Chicago's bustling garment district during the height of Prohibition. She lived in a cramped boarding house on the South Side with 4 other young women who had come to the city seeking independence and opportunity in the aftermath of World War I. These were the modern women of the 1920s: bobbed hair, shortened skirts, cigarettes, and dreams of lives their mothers could never have imagined. But Helena's story would become a cautionary tale about the dangers that lurked beneath the glittering surface of the Jazz Age. The photograph was taken on October 15, 1921, during what was supposed to be a celebration. Helena and her roommates Mary O'Brien, Sophie Kowalski, Anna Petrova, and Carmen Rodriguez had gathered in their shared parlor to commemorate Helena's recent promotion to floor supervisor at Brennan Textiles. It was a significant achievement for a young Jewish immigrant who had arrived in America just 5 years earlier with nothing but hope and determination. Her friends had pooled their money to hire a photographer, something that was still considered a luxury for working-class women of their generation. The photographer, Edward Morrison, was a well-regarded portraitist who specialized in capturing the emerging culture of independent working women. His studio was located in the Loop, but he often made house calls for special occasions, bringing his equipment directly to his subjects' homes. Morrison had photographed hundreds of young women during his career, documenting the changing face of American womanhood as traditional roles gave way to new possibilities. But the session with Helena and her friends would be unlike any other he had ever conducted. According to Morrison's detailed notes, discovered decades later in his estate, something was wrong from the moment he arrived at the boarding house. Helena appeared agitated and kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting someone to appear. When he suggested they pose near the large front window, where the light was best, Helena vehemently refused, insisting they remain in the center of the room, as far from the windows as possible. Her friends attributed her nervousness to excitement about the promotion. But Morrison sensed something deeper, fear that seemed to permeate the very air around her. As Morrison set up his equipment, Helena paced the room, occasionally stopping to peer through the lace curtains at the street below. "He's out there," she muttered to Mary O'Brien, who later recounted the conversation to police. "I can feel him watching. He never stops watching." Mary had assumed Helena was referring to an overly persistent suitor. Such attention was common for attractive young women in the city. But Helena's terror seemed disproportionate to mere romantic pursuit. The positioning for the photograph took longer than usual because Helena kept breaking formation, claiming she heard footsteps on the stairs or voices in the hallway. Morrison noted that the building's other residents were all at work, making such sounds highly unlikely. Eventually, the women managed to arrange themselves in a traditional group posed 4 of them seated and standing in elegant formation, with Helena in the center. But just as Morrison prepared to take the photograph, something extraordinary happened. Helena suddenly pointed directly at the camera with a gesture so urgent and desperate that it startled everyone in the room. Her face contorted with terror, her mouth opened wide as if to scream, and her eyes fixed on something behind Morrison with an intensity that made the photographer instinctively turn around. But there was nothing there, just the empty doorway leading to the corridor. When Morrison turned back to his camera, Helena was still pointing, still frozen in that gesture of warning or accusation, her entire body rigid with fear. "Take it, now," Helena commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take it, exactly like this. Someone needs to see. Someone needs to know." Morrison, confused but professional, captured the image exactly as she demanded. The result was a photograph unlike any he had ever taken for women looking elegant and composed, and one woman in the center, pointing directly at the viewer, with an expression of pure terror that seemed to leap from the photographic plate. Immediately after the shutter clicked, Helena collapsed into a chair, trembling violently. Her friends rushed to comfort her, but she seemed unable to explain what had frightened her so severely. "He knows," she kept repeating. "He knows, I know, and now he knows I've left proof." When pressed for details about who he was and what she meant by proof, Helena became evasive, claiming she had already said too much. The celebration that was supposed to follow, the photograph session, never materialized. Helena's terror had infected the entire group, and Morrison quickly packed his equipment and left, promising to deliver the finished photographs within a week. As he walked to his carriage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched from somewhere in the shadows surrounding the boarding house. Several times he turned around, certain he had glimpsed a figure ducking behind a corner or into a doorway, but he could never catch sight of anyone directly. Helena's behavior in the 3 days between the photograph session and her murder became increasingly erratic. Her supervisor at Brennan Textiles later told police that she had become distracted and jumpy, constantly looking over her shoulder and flinching at unexpected sounds. She had started arriving at work early and leaving late, claiming she felt safer in the crowded factory than in the relative isolation of the boarding house. Her roommates noticed that she had begun barricading her bedroom door at night, pushing furniture against it and checking the locks multiple times before attempting to sleep. On October 17, 1921, Helena received an unexpected visitor at work. According to witnesses, a well-dressed gentleman in his 40s had asked to speak with her privately, claiming to be a representative from a competing textile company interested in offering her a better position. Helena initially refused to meet with him, but he persisted, eventually convincing her supervisor that the meeting could benefit both Helena and Brennan Textiles by potentially leading to a lucrative business relationship. The meeting took place in a small office adjacent to the factory floor. Through the glass partition, workers could see Helena and the mysterious visitor engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Witnesses later described Helena's body language as crossed, leaning away from the man, shaking her head repeatedly. The stranger seemed to be pleading with her, gesturing emphatically and occasionally reaching into his coat pocket, as if to show her something. The conversation lasted approximately 20 minutes, after which the man left abruptly, and Helena returned to her station visibly shaken. That evening, Helena confided in Mary O'Brien about the meeting. "He wasn't offering me a job," she whispered as they prepared for bed. "He was threatening me. He knows about the photographs I took at the Riverside warehouse. He knows I have evidence of what they're doing there." Mary pressed for details, but Helena refused to elaborate, saying only that she had stumbled upon something at her previous job that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. She had taken photographs as insurance, she explained. But now those same photographs had made her a target. The Riverside warehouse had been Helena's previous place of employment, a garment factory on the outskirts of the city that had mysteriously burned down 6 months earlier. The official investigation had concluded that the fire was accidental, caused by faulty electrical wiring. But Helena had always insisted that the blaze was deliberately set to destroy evidence of illegal activities. She claimed to have witnessed meetings between factory owners and men she believed to be associated with organized crime, discussions about using the legitimate business to launder money from bootlegging operations. Helena's photographs, if they existed, were never found. Her room was thoroughly searched after her murder, but police discovered no camera, no photographs, and no documentation related to the Riverside warehouse. Either Helena had hidden them extremely well, or her killer had found and destroyed them. Before the authorities arrived, the only evidence that remained was her cryptic warning captured in Morrison's photograph, her finger pointing directly at the camera, as if identifying her future murderer to anyone who might look at the image. The murder itself occurred on October 18, 1921, exactly 3 days after the fateful photograph session. Helena had worked a normal shift at Brennan Textiles and had walked home with Sophie Kowalski as usual. The two women parted ways at the corner near their boarding house, with Sophie continuing to the market to buy groceries for dinner while Helena went directly home. It was the last time anyone would see Helena alive. Helena's body was discovered by Mary O'Brien when she returned from her own job at a nearby department store. Mary found the front door of the boarding house standing open, which was unusual given Helena's recent paranoia about security. Helena lay at the bottom of the main staircase, her neck broken, her body positioned in a way that initially suggested she had fallen accidentally while rushing downstairs. But closer examination revealed details that pointed to something far more sinister. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. Samuel Hartwell of the Cook County Coroner's Office, determined that Helena's injuries were not consistent with an accidental fall. The angle of the break in her neck suggested that it had been twisted deliberately, and there were bruises on her arms and torso indicating she had fought desperately against her attacker. Most disturbing of all, her right index finger, same finger she had pointed with in the photograph, had been deliberately broken. The bone snapped cleanly in 2 places, as if someone had wanted to ensure she would never point accusingly again. The crime scene itself told a story of premeditation and professional execution. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Helena had either known her killer or that he had possessed a key to the boarding house. Her room had been methodically searched, with particular attention paid to areas where photographs might be hidden. Drawers, books, picture frames, and even the lining of her clothes had been examined. Yet nothing appeared to be missing, except for a small wooden box that Mary O'Brien remembered Helena keeping under her bed. Contents unknown. Detective Michael Flynn, assigned to investigate the murder, immediately suspected a connection between Helena's death and her claims about the Riverside warehouse fire. Flynn was a 20-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department who had seen his share of mysterious deaths during the violent early years of Prohibition. He recognized the hallmarks of a professional killing, the precise nature of the injuries, the thorough search of the victim's belongings, and the apparent attempt to make the murder look like an accident. Flynn's investigation into the Riverside warehouse fire revealed a complex web of corruption involving factory owners, city officials, and organized crime figures. The warehouse had been insured for far more than its actual value, and the insurance money had been collected remarkably quickly after the fire. Moreover, several employees who had worked there during Helena's tenure had since died under suspicious circumstances, one in an apparent mugging, another in a hit-and-run accident, and a third who had simply disappeared without a trace. The detectives' attempts to identify the mysterious visitor who had met with Helena at Brennan Textiles proved frustratingly unsuccessful. The man had given a false name and false business credentials, and none of the factory workers could provide a detailed enough description for a useful police sketch. He seemed to be someone skilled at remaining forgettable, a professional who understood how to move through the world without leaving traces. This only reinforced Flynn's belief that Helena had been killed by someone with significant resources and experience in eliminating problems. As Flynn delved deeper into the case, he began to uncover evidence of a broader conspiracy involving the systematic elimination of witnesses to illegal activities at various factories throughout Chicago. The city's rapid industrial growth during the post-war boom had created opportunities for corruption on an unprecedented scale, and those who threatened to expose these activities faced deadly consequences. Helena appeared to be just one victim in a larger pattern of silencing potential witnesses. The photograph taken by Edward Morrison became a crucial piece of evidence, though its significance was not immediately apparent to investigators. Flynn studied the image obsessively, trying to decode the meaning behind Helena's desperate gesture. Was she pointing at someone standing behind the camera? Was she trying to identify her future killer? Or was she simply leaving a message for those who would investigate her death, a warning that her murder was not random but the calculated action of someone who had been watching and planning? Morrison himself provided additional context that proved crucial to understanding the photograph's significance. In his statement to police, the photographer revealed that he had felt an overwhelming sense of being watched during the entire session. He described a persistent feeling that someone was observing him from outside the boarding house, and he mentioned hearing what sounded like footsteps in the hallway during the shoot, despite the other residents being away at work. Most importantly, Morrison recalled that just before Helena's pointing gesture, she had looked directly over his shoulder with an expression of recognition and terror. It wasn't fear of the unknown, Morrison told Flynn. It was the fear of someone who had just seen exactly what she had been dreading. She knew who was there, and she knew what it meant. This suggested that Helena's killer had been present during the photograph session, possibly watching from outside the building, or even standing in the corridor behind the photographer. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Flynn discovered that Helena had not been the only person to take photographs at the Riverside warehouse. Through careful questioning of former employees, he learned that at least 3 other workers had documented suspicious activities at the factory, hoping to use the evidence to expose corruption or protect themselves from retaliation. All 3 of these individuals had died under mysterious circumstances in the months following the warehouse fire. This pattern suggested that someone was systematically tracking down and eliminating anyone who possessed photographic evidence of illegal activities. The killer was not just targeting Helena specifically, but was working through a list of potential witnesses, using their own evidence against them to identify and locate them. Helena's desperate pointing gesture in the photograph began to make more sense. She was not just identifying her killer, but warning future viewers that the very act of possessing such evidence was deadly. Flynn's investigation was abruptly terminated in November 1921, just weeks after Helena's murder. He was reassigned to a different case and warned by his superiors that the Rosenberg investigation was being handled at a higher level. When Flynn attempted to access the case files weeks later, he discovered that they had been removed from the department's records, along with all physical evidence, including Morrison's photograph. The official explanation was that the case had been solved and closed, though no arrest was ever made public, and no conviction ever obtained. The photographer Edward Morrison met his own mysterious end just 6 months after taking Helena's final portrait. He was found dead in his studio, apparently from a heart attack, though he was only 38 years old and had no known heart problems. His photographic plates and negatives, including all copies of Helena's final photograph, disappeared from his studio before police arrived. The only surviving copy of the image was one that Morrison had given to Mary O'Brien immediately after the session, which she had hidden and later provided to Detective Flynn. Mary O'Brien herself lived in fear for months after Helena's murder, convinced that she too would be targeted for her knowledge of her friend's claims about the Riverside warehouse. She eventually left Chicago entirely, moving to California where she married and took her husband's name, effectively disappearing from any records that might connect her to the case. Before leaving, she entrusted the photograph to her priest, Father Thomas McCarthy, asking him to keep it safe in case anyone ever sought to investigate Helena's death properly. The photograph remained in the church archives for nearly 50 years, forgotten and unexamined until 1971, when Father McCarthy, now elderly and dying, confessed to a young assistant priest about the mysterious image he had been guarding. The assistant, Father David Sterling, was fascinated by the story and began his own investigation into Helena's murder, using modern research techniques and resources that had not been available to Detective Flynn in 1921. Father Sterling's research revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that had killed Helena Rosenberg. Working with university criminology students and amateur historians, he uncovered evidence of a systematic campaign to eliminate witnesses to corruption in Chicago's industrial sector during the early 1920s. The campaign had been orchestrated by a coalition of business owners, organized crime figures, and corrupt city officials who had profited enormously from illegal activities during Prohibition. The investigation identified at least 17 suspicious deaths between 1920 and 1923, all involving individuals who had worked at factories that later experienced mysterious fires, explosions, or other disasters that destroyed evidence of wrongdoing. In each case, the victims had either been known to possess photographic evidence of illegal activities or had made statements suggesting they intended to expose corruption. Helena's case was particularly significant because her final photograph provided visual evidence of her terror and her attempt to identify her killer. Modern forensic analysis of Morrison's photograph, conducted in the 1970s using enhanced magnification and contrast techniques, revealed previously unnoticed details that supported Helena's claims about being watched. In the background of the image, barely visible through the lace curtains of the window, is a dark shape that appears to be a human figure standing across the street from the boarding house. The shape is too indistinct to provide identification, but its position and posture suggests someone engaged in surveillance. More disturbing still is what appears to be a second figure reflected in the glass of a picture frame hanging on the wall. Behind the women, this reflection shows what looks like a man standing in the doorway to the parlor, exactly where Helena was looking when she made her desperate pointing gesture. The reflection is extremely faint and could potentially be explained as a photographic artifact, but its position corresponds perfectly with Helena's line of sight and her apparent recognition of someone behind the photographer. Psychological analysis of Helena's expression and body language in the photograph, conducted by criminal behavior experts in the 1980s, concluded that she was experiencing genuine terror at the moment the image was captured. Her facial expression, muscle tension, and overall posture all indicate someone in acute distress who believed herself to be in immediate danger. The pointing gesture itself is analyzed as both accusatory and protective, an attempt to identify a threat while simultaneously warning others of its presence. The case gained renewed attention in the 1990s when Chicago Police Department archives were digitized and Helena's murder file was rediscovered. along with Detective Flynn's original notes and Morrison's photograph. Modern investigators were struck by the sophistication of the cover-up and the systematic nature of the witness elimination campaign. Using contemporary investigative techniques, they were able to identify several individuals who had likely been involved in the conspiracy, though all were long dead by the time the investigation was reopened. DNA analysis of evidence from Helena's crime scene, preserved in the police archives, revealed traces of genetic material from at least 2 unknown individuals, suggesting that multiple people had been involved in her murder. This supported Detective Flynn's original theory that Helena had been killed by professionals rather than a single individual acting alone. The systematic search of her room and the precise nature of her injuries both pointed to experienced killers who understood how to eliminate evidence and make murders appear accidental. The most chilling discovery came when investigators realized that Helena's murder was just one part of a much larger criminal enterprise that had operated throughout the Midwest during the early years of Prohibition. Using financial records, newspaper archives, and government documents, they traced a network of corrupt businesses that had used factory fires and industrial accidents to destroy evidence, while collecting insurance, money, and eliminating witnesses. The scale of the conspiracy was unprecedented, involving dozens of businesses, hundreds of deaths, and millions of dollars in illegal profits. Helena's final photograph became a symbol of the courage required to speak truth to power, even in the face of deadly consequences. Her pointing gesture, frozen forever in silver and gelatin, serves as an eternal accusation against those who silenced her, and an inspiration to those who continue to seek justice for forgotten victims. Modern true crime investigators have used the image as a teaching tool, demonstrating how careful analysis of photographic evidence can reveal details that were invisible to earlier generations of investigators. The boarding house where Helena lived and died still stands in Chicago, though it has been converted to condominiums and bears no marker indicating its historical significance. Local historians have petitioned for a memorial plaque, but their efforts have been repeatedly blocked by current residents, who prefer not to publicize the building's connection to an unsolved murder. The lack of official recognition reflects a broader reluctance to confront the systematic corruption that characterized Chicago's industrial development during the early 20th century. Father Sterling, now in his 80s, continues to research Helena's case and has written extensively about the intersection of organized crime, industrial corruption, and witness elimination during Prohibition. His work has inspired a new generation of investigators who use modern technology to re-examine cold cases from the 1920s, searching for patterns and connections that earlier investigators missed. Helena's photograph remains central to this research, serving as both evidence and inspiration. The mystery of what Helena photographed at the Riverside warehouse may never be fully solved, but investigators have developed several theories based on available evidence. The most likely scenario involves documentation of meetings between factory owners and bootleggers, who were using legitimate businesses to launder money from illegal alcohol sales. Helena may have captured images of these meetings, along with evidence of the planned arson that would destroy the warehouse and eliminate any records of the illegal activities. Another theory suggests that Helena discovered evidence of a human trafficking operation that used immigrant workers as forced labor in dangerous factory conditions. The systematic elimination of witnesses would have been crucial to maintaining such an operation, and Helena's background as an immigrant herself might have made her particularly sensitive to signs of exploitation. Her photographs could have documented working conditions, meeting participants, or financial transactions related to the trafficking network. The most disturbing theory proposes that Helena uncovered evidence of deliberate industrial accidents designed to eliminate workers who had become liabilities. Some investigators believe that factory owners, in cooperation with organized crime figures, orchestrated fires, explosions, and building collapses to kill workers who possessed damaging information or who had become too expensive to maintain. Helena's photographs might have documented the planning or execution of such incidents, making her an extremely dangerous witness. Regardless of exactly what Helena discovered, her final photograph stands as a testament to the courage of ordinary people who risk everything to expose corruption and injustice. Her pointing gesture, captured forever at the moment of her greatest terror, continues to accuse and inspire more than a century after her murder. The image reminds us that truth-telling has always been dangerous, and that those who speak out against powerful interests do so at their own peril. Modern viewers of Helena's photograph often report feeling unsettled by her direct gaze and pointing gesture, as if she is looking directly at them and demanding action. This psychological impact has made the image a powerful tool for advocacy groups working to protect whistleblowers and expose corporate corruption. Helena's story demonstrates that the stakes of such work can be literally life and death, and that society has an obligation to protect those who risk everything to reveal the truth. The techniques used to silence Helena: surveillance, intimidation, professional murder, and systematic destruction of evidence remain disturbingly familiar to contemporary observers. Her case serves as a historical precedent for understanding how powerful interests work to eliminate threats to their activities, and how official institutions can be corrupted to facilitate cover-ups. The parallels between Helena's experience and modern cases of witness elimination and evidence destruction are sobering reminders that the forces she confronted continued to operate in different forms. Today, Helena Rosenberg's final photograph will forever remain one of the most haunting images in the history of American crime. Her desperate pointing gesture, captured just 3 days before her murder, serves as an eternal indictment of those who killed her and a permanent reminder that some secrets are worth dying for. In that single frozen moment, Helena managed to preserve both her terror and her courage, leaving behind evidence that continues to inspire and horrify. More than a century after, the camera's shutter closed on her final warning to the world. The woman who pointed at the camera in 1921 was indeed predicting her own murder, and her prophecy came true with terrifying precision. But her gesture also predicted something else: that her story would survive, that her courage would be remembered, and that her pointing finger would continue to accuse her killers, long after they believed they had silenced her forever. In death, Helena Rosenberg achieved something she could never have accomplished in life: immortality as a symbol of resistance against corruption, and a reminder that truth, once captured, can never truly be destroyed.